Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story, The Strange Events of the Mysterious Music Box. My name is Drive, Otto Materovi. I live in a quite lovely home in France. However, I wasn't born in this country, as you might be able to tell by the name. I was born and partially raised in Ukraine. I moved to France when I was 32. What kind of doctor am I? Well, I'm an animal psychologist. I work with animals by trying to make them understand humans. It's very hard to understand. I have another big interest though. I love collecting instruments and instrumental things, especially the antiques. I have over 100 instruments in my home, most in the attic anyway. Let's begin with my story. It was one languid day. I got interested in buying some music, so I started my way to the music museum. When I got there, there were many things for sale, and a lot of people looking for something they might be interested in, including me. I noticed that this day was pretty crowded with buyers and dealers, so I decided to go to the less populated area of the museum. I walked my way down to a darker part of the place. At least I thought it was darker, until I found a man that seemed to be anxious for buyers. Before I walked up to him, I spotted a big chest, probably filled with divine and rare instruments. I hurried over to him to ask what was for sale. As I approached him, he said in a coarse voice, "You want this box?" I got a little confused on why he was so harsh, but I politely said, "Yes, sir. I would love to have it. What's inside, if I may ask?" "It's just things," he said. "What kind of things?" I asked. "Just music things. Any antiques?" I asked. "Yes, sir. Very historic items," he replied. I got very excited and asked for the price right away. It was only 200, which was quite cheap for antique instruments. When I got to my house, I took the large chest into my home and immediately opened it. I found a few violins, a guitar, a bunch of instrumental gear and 2 trumpets. I guess it was all right. After I took the instruments to the attic and was about to leave to go to bed, I wanted to take one last look inside the large box. I opened it and admired the things I purchased. I waved my hand into the bottom to find any more instrumental gear, until I felt something strange and square-like. I picked it out of the chest to find a completely black music box. I was amazed that I found it, and I immediately wanted to open it, to hear what composer it was. Before I opened it, I saw in the back of it saying, "The Easy and Club." I'd never heard of that song before. I opened it up and saw the great machinery that was inside. I then winded it up to make the music go. It sounded pretty and soothing. I had no idea who made this tune, but it was so relaxing. I felt so sleepy listening to it that I dropped down and fell right asleep. But the dreams, oh how terrible the dreams were after I listened to the music. I was sitting in a room. On a gurney, these men with black and red robes appeared to me with needles, about to inject something into my flesh. I wanted to wake up, but I couldn't. I felt trapped. I was trapped. The next dream was even worse. We're happily playing in a playground when the men with black and red robes suddenly appeared. They took out ropes and armed the children, but the children weren't struggling. They still looked happy, as if they wanted to die. I woke up on the attic floor. I felt sick. not only from the dreams, but I felt sickness from inside me. I went down to my bedroom to rest. I was so sweaty and exhausted for some reason. I laid there for a long while, thinking about the dreams. Then I heard a quiet drinking noise. I realized that the music box was still playing somehow. Before I could do something, I fell asleep. I tried to stay awake as long as I could. I even tried moving my body, but my limbs felt numb. I couldn't do anything. And then the dreams, no, these weren't dreams. They were visions. They were even worse than the last ones. I'm crying right now just thinking about them. The men in the black and red robes took a dead man and sliced his hand. All the blood dripped into a baby's bottle. They then pointed at me and beckoned me over to them. I walked over and they gave me the bottle with the blood in it. They pointed at a baby in a crib. The baby was crying. They told me to feed the baby the blood. They forced me to do it. I then gave the baby the bottle of blood. The baby suckled on it, but it kept crying. Today I don't have the black music box that says the easy and clouds. I went far away and threw it in a river, but just because it's gone does not help my discomfort. Actually, the reason it is gone still reminds me of the dreams and the song of the strange events of the mysterious music box. The second story, The Infinite Journey. It was pitch black. The headlights on his blue suit and were the only lights he could see, and the last car passed him in an hour ago. Robert Westfield was not going anywhere, just driving on the road to damnation. 5 hours ago, Robert was at his office working late. He was stressed from a big project to him by his boss, an important project that would decide the fate of the company. As he drove, Robert thought back to the details before he got to this point. He had gathered up his papers, getting ready to leave. Normally, he would use the elevator to get down to the parking garage, but it was closed for repairs today. This led him to the stairs, past the secretary's desk. The secretary was a fat rump of a woman named Ruby Johnson, and the lapdog of the boss. He hated her and lamented the elevators closing. The woman surprised him by smiling at him, something he has never seen in his 10 years at the company. "Good night, Robert." Robert remained silent and went down the stairs. Thoughts of the project work pushed back in favor of the strange actions of Ruby. Maybe he was descending into hell, or madness at least. The thoughts were halted by the door to the parking garage. The door was creaky and hard to open, especially for Robert, who was weaker than he wanted to be. He got to his blue sedan, the cheapest car he could find. The radio was out, seats tattered, but at least it works, and he left the garage. Everything was wrong. The highway went on and on into the ebony darkness, and Robert now felt anxious. He wanted to know what was happening. He felt dead, a rotting corpse that still showed signs of life. Everything previously present in his life was not a factor. My ex-wife, my daughter, my work, it's so distant. His own thoughts haunted him, stung him. More memories came flooding back. Robert had stopped to get gas before getting on the highway. Even then, the area was a ghost town. The cashier was strange, and he acted hostile towards Robert. They were normally great friends, confiding their secrets with each other before pulling out. A hitchhiker in the form of a young girl with a backpack on asked him for a ride. Robert politely declined. "Company, that's what I need. I wished this damn radio would work." I need to hear someone's voice, as if God or whoever was doing this read his mind. The radio burst back into the living world, whether tomorrow will be pouring rain. So bring your umbrella, folks. In other news, an accident on Highway 65 have resulted in the deaths of 40-year-old Static interrupted the broadcast as Robert stood there, mouth agape. The radio hasn't worked in 15 years. He bought the car with it broken. Worse, the news report made Robert really think he was dead. He was on Highway 65, and he was 40 years old, but it said deaths. Who was the other person? Robert was now sure of one thing. He was in hell, and there would be no going home to rest. Robert's head was pounding, and checked his glove compartment for some Tylenol. There was none. Just like he expected, it was hell after all. Accepting the fact that he was dead, Robert ran several things through his head. First, Robert thought about going backwards, but dismissed it as soon as he thought of it. Next, Robert thought of driving through the desert. He kept this in his back mind pocket. And lastly, thought of stopping. Robert seriously considered doing this, and did stop the car. Sitting in his car for a few moments, he reached for the door. The handle broke off, and Robert couldn't get the door open. Robert broke the window with his briefcase and climbed out. The radio crackled back on, with an ominous message Robert failed to hear. Don't go outside, folks. There's going to be a foot of snow in certain eerie. Then static. Looking behind him was equally as unimpressive as looking towards the front. Both sides looked the same. Robert walked further from his car. Even though he was afraid of leaving the light, he went to the edge of highway, kneeling down to feel the deserts. And as he examined the sand, the lights on his car went out, sweating bullets. Robert quickly forgot the path back to his car. Robert took a couple of steps away from the desert. Suddenly, a spotlight centered on Robert. It lit up a wide radius. Revealing his car was no longer there. The secretary, Ruby Johnson, stepped out from the black void. Hello, Robert. Ruby still had on the purple leopard print dress from the office, and wondered what she was doing here. You forgot to say good night to me before leaving, Robbie. Ruby laughed, a cutesy, childlike laugh, which disturbed Robert. She has never used any reverencing, let alone love. Why don't you like me, Robbie? I'm always so nice to you. Who was you? Her voice turned demonic as she transformed into a hideous demon. Devoid of any human qualities, Robert could not explain what he saw, but it lacked a face and was blob-like. The spotlight shut off, and he was back in his bruised, and before he could catch his breath, the gas station cashier appeared in the seat next to him. Hard day at work, Robert? Tell me about it. You can tell me anything. You can trust it. Stop me. The cashier suddenly disappeared, his echoing laugh still ringing in Robert's ears. A knock at his window startled him. It was the hitchhiker. She was naked and crying. You did this to me, Robert. I should have never ridden with you, you sick bastard. Robert was thrown out his car by an unknown force and landed on his back. Sitting up, he saw his ex-wife and daughter. They were sobbing uncontrollably, and Robert resented himself for not being there with his daughter. Robert went to speak, but no words came out. Nothing he would say would fix anything. This night was all a mistake. His life was a mistake, and there would be no rectifying anything. He was dead, and he definitely knew. The rest of his memories came flooding back. He had picked up that hitchhiker. His stress made him irrational, and his mind sick. He tried to do horrible things to that girl, which got him slapped. Losing control of the car, he crashed into a ditch, killing them both. Suddenly, Being alone wasn't so bad. Robert was back to driving on the highway. Robert deserved it. Robert was stuck driving in what would be his own infinite journey with his thoughts, and guilt remaining with him in hell. The third story, duality. Curious gaze today, very curious. Indeed, in fact, since this afternoon, I have been sitting quietly in my study, sipping from a dwindling supply of Chardonnay, reconsidering everything I ever thought I knew about the intricacies of the human mind. Started out simple enough boy, 16, blonde hair, green eyes, handsome, I suppose, though not in the typical teenage football star way. More of a subtle attractiveness of average height, slightly underweight, and pale waxy complexion, gaunt expression. There was a look in his eyes that suggests an underlying layer of resignation, as if he has ceased to care about what happens to him. An expression of guilt, perhaps, or something else. After seeing what I have seen today, I am inclined to think the latter. He entered with his head down, his hands jammed into the pockets of his jeans. His light, straw-colored hair hung down over his eyes, hiding his face in shadows. He took a seat on the sofa, crossed his hands behind his head, and flipped his hair up so I could see his face. I was surprised. This was not the face of a killer, but of a tired and weary soul that has been tossed about upon the stormy ocean of life and weathered the adverse tides. He looked at me in stoic silence. I at him. There was something captivating about those blonde, forest-hued eyes. It was as if they were nothing more than a dam, holding back a roaring deluge of emotion. I looked at him for a period of time that was undoubtedly much shorter than it felt, studying the one before me there. Amongst the lines on his face, I read an emotion. I could thankfully identify regret. Here was something, at least, that I was familiar with, something common to almost every adolescent in a similar position. Not for the sin for which he was here. Of course no. Not that, but the fact that he had been attributed with that same sin and made to be held accountable for his atrocities. Finally, I broke the optical connection, looking down at the patient's information. Mark Beauchamp, is it? I asked. I leaned forward from my seat, hand outstretched. My name is Richard Trimble. My friends call me Rich. My patented "don't worry, my friend" smile was in position, my demeanor lax. I was doing nothing to belie the underlying disgust I felt for the murdering child monster that sat before me, or so I thought. Mark looked down at my hand with barely discernible contempt. "Well, Jack Trimble," he said, and I was shocked to detect a hint of mocking condescension in his voice. "I don't particularly care what your friends call you, seeing as I am neither counted amongst their undoubtedly minuscule numbers nor wish to be. I am well aware what you think of me, and I can assure you that my opinion of yourself is only marginally better. So let us drop these pretenses, shall we? I am your patient, you are my counselor, so let us speak freely, unhindered by unnecessary falsity and feigned politeness." My fingers curled back as I withdrew my hand. I fought to bite back a retort, a battle I thankfully won during my tenure as a teen psychologist. I had been physically attacked, bitten, even urinated upon, but nothing but this boy's brief yet venomous speech had ever elicited the sheer imbibed anger I felt at those words. Flustered and taken aback, I looked down at my clipboard, not because there was anything of particular significance there, but because I could not bear to look at those eyes. I felt quite certain that whatever rounds of regret I had read upon those alien features had been nothing but a trick of my own mind, desperate to relate something about this hetero, sea-like boy to the world I was familiar with and understood. When I looked up at Beauchamp, I jumped slightly in my seat. Though he did not seem to notice, the boy was no longer staring at me with those unfathomable eyes, but was stretched out upon the red leather of the sofa, apparently watching the fan whirl around and around in its infinite rotation. The regret had returned to his face stronger, and I was sure of its existence this time, and it was mingled with something else. Sorrow, and not the worthless, self-pitying sorrow I had seen so often, but genuine, empathetic sorrow, the sorrow one feels at the pain of another human being. "Mark?" I asked, and I pretended not to hear the slight tremble in my voice. "Mark, are you all right?" This was a stupid question, of course, and I berated myself internally for feeling pity, however fleeting, for the monster before me. For a short while I was utterly convinced he would not answer. When he finally spoke, my girls, he was my girl, but it all fell apart in an instant, like a dandelion puff in the wind. This time, his voice contained none of the subtle, razor-edged sarcasm that had tainted his previous speech. He paused, and I knew he was somewhere far away, far beyond this world. The Twilight Zone, perhaps. "I didn't kill her, you see," Mark said, still lying back on the sofa and staring straight up at the ceiling. His voice was calm, almost manically so. In fact, as if a wave of madness lurked behind his mask of composure, ready to burst forth at any moment. I said nothing. I only sat there in my chair, marveling at the sudden transformation. Beauchamp shook his head. "No, I didn't kill her, he killed her, the other one, the dark one." For one brief moment, his tranquility dissolved, and his bright green eyes crackled with lunacy. And then, the calm returned as quickly as it had left, and the boy was once more as placid as a pond on a warm summer's day. "You don't believe me," he said, turning his head slightly to look at me. "I know that. I can see it in your eyes, the almost non-existent look of disgust on your face when you look at me. He's crazy. You think you just sit there in your nice chintz chair, nodding and smiling and thinking about the nice fat wad of cash my parents are handing you to sit here and listen to me." A flicker of uncomfortableness crossed my features. I knew what the boy was saying was true. I did think he was crazy, but now I don't know it. That's the most likely answer, of course. But I wonder. I don't know. I just know maybe we're all crazy. Mark turned to look at me, and I did my best to meet his gaze with equal equanimity. The ghost of a smile seemed to flicker upon the boy's thin lips. Those eyes once again began to heat up, seeming to crack, to let through some of what was hidden beneath. "I may not have a PhD in human psychology, Dr. Trimble, but if you would be so kind as to oblige me, I would like to wax philosophical for a short while." "You see, Doctor," sneered Mark, enunciating the last word with the utmost sarcasm, "inside of every human being there is another person, a dark side, if you will, in most people. He is caged by the soul, trapped deep within our subconscious, but he is always fighting to escape, scrabbling at the bars of his prison, and sometimes, no matter how hard we fight to deny it, Doctor, he shines through. He's the one that laughs wildly when some teenage sex bottle gets carved up by the guy with the chainsaw in the low-budget slasher flick. He's the one that watches in morbid fascination as an earthquake that killed thousands flashes across the evening news. drawing some sick satisfaction from each Mongol corpse buried beneath the rubble. He's the one that fuels our obsession with pain and death, something that we've possessed since the dawning of our species. The smile became more pronounced as he spoke. He sat up. That bright fervor I had suspected lay hidden within those inscrutable eyes, showing through more and more. Of course, you don't take any of this seriously, do you? I'm crazy, remember? I looked at the boy, and I could see that he believed with the utmost conviction that what he said was true. That was when I began to really wonder. He brushed the hair out of his eyes and began to speak again. Your whole life, your whole career, all your studies, they all mean nothing. Doctor, the human mind is a worthless thing. The brain, for all of its astoundingly intricate workings, is nothing but a vessel. A vessel, Doctor, for our souls. The soul, not the mind, is the true source of our being, and our soul is a battleground. A bloody war zone where two separate beings, two beings who we think of as one, fight for dominance. In most cases, I believe, the side we would think of as good wins out. For the most part, I believe, we are able to keep our darker side caged, trapped. He paused again. How do you know these things, Mark? I asked. My voice was trembling. I was trembling. Somehow, these things he was saying, these insane, impossible things, felt true. Tell me how you know these things. He ignored me, continuing on with his explanations as if I had never spoken. But sometimes, Mark said, and the spark of madness was becoming more and more prevalent in his eyes, turning them into blazing gems, dancing with thinly contained lunacy. Sometimes, Doctor, she escapes to the forefront, and he becomes the dominant one, and we end up with the Mansons, the Hitlers, the Jack the Rippers sometimes, Drav Trimble. He wins. He lapsed into an awkward silence, and I tried to gather my thoughts. I met with limited success. Mark sat there, not talking, and the madness slunk away from his eyes, leaving them dawned lusterless. When he spoke again, his voice possessed none of its former fervor. When he spoke again, his voice was empty, as if he had reverted to his former apathetic state. For this, at least, I was grateful. When I was younger, Dr. Trimble, I don't know, 11 or 12, 11 or 12, I think anyways. It doesn't matter. So when I was younger, I would have these, well, I guess you could call episodes. I would get violent. I can't explain it. Really, it was like I was somebody else. Now I know that I really was. There was one incident in particular that sticks out in my mind. Our neighbors, the Joneses, had this cat, stupid, scrawny thing, with scraggly fur and a chimp leg. They called him Mr. Cuddles. God knows why. One day, I was riding my bike home from my friend Jimmy's house, when I saw the cat sitting there on the side of the road, licking its dirty haunches. There had been incidents before, but this was by far the worst. I should say he got off my bike, and then picked up a couple of sharp rocks from the side of the road. I was scared. I didn't know what I was doing. It was like being possessed. I was looking through my eyes, seeing what he was seeing, feeling the hard, jagged surface of the stones in my hands, feeling what he was feeling, but I couldn't stop it. I heard myself begin to laugh, and then felt my arm whip forward as he chucked one of the rocks at the cat, and then another and another, until finally Mr. Cuddles was only a bloody lump of fur and flesh lying dead on the curb. I was in the back seat and he was at the wheel. I watched in horror at what he did, powerless to stop him. I was just along for the ride. When it was all over, I stood there, panting, and I had a splitting headache. I buried the cat out behind our house, where no one would find it. No one ever suspected that I had anything to do with Mr. Paddles' disappearance. I never told anyone, and then he went away for a while, at least. Mark stopped closing his eyes. His voice was as flat and hollow, devoid of all emotion. He took a deep breath, and then resumed. The other one came back the night after the school dance. Me and Shannon, well, we got in a fight. I don't remember what it was about. I know it was something stupid, sex, maybe. I don't know. I don't think so. But I can't say for sure. The whole night's a blur now. Anyway, I could feel it. I could feel him as he slipped slowly into the front seat. Feel him relishing his chance to let loose all the bloody hatred that had lain dormant for all those years. He hit her. I hit her, she cried. She begged. She screamed for help. But he wouldn't stop hitting her. I wanted to scream. Every blow that my fists laid upon her was like a blow to me. She was my girl, my girl. She ran away, all the way back to her house. Her dress in tatters. He ran after her, called her a bitch and worse things. I called her worse things. I was horrified at what he had done, what I had done. He was a miserable sight, and I began to once again feel pity for the boy, for that is what he was. A boy who was lost and confused, and bearing unimaginable pain. A boy with a monster within him, the same monster, perhaps, that lies within us all, or if not the same, then of an almost identical nature. I started to speak, but he interrupted me. The next day, at school, I tried to talk to her. She wouldn't even look at me. No one would look at me, they all knew. Even my friends, when I tried to talk to them, they found some excuse to drift away. I felt dirty, diseased, contaminated. Some of us, doctor, can't keep him caged. I'm weak and pathetic. I passed her in the hallway and saw that her eye was black. I felt terrible, as if I had been the one to beat her, because I know, deep down, I am him, and he is me. We are one and the same, the halves of one coin. It is this duality that defines us all, and no amount of pitiful denial will change that. I knew then that it was over, and so did he. That night, I was lying in bed, flipping through the channels. When it happened, he sat up, turned off the TV, and went downstairs. I tried to stop him. I knew what he was going to do, but of course, I was powerless. Like I said, worthless. And weak. He took a knife from the kitchen and walked outside, red gleaming silver in the moonlight. I felt the cool plastic of the hilt clutched within my hand. His mind, our mind, was filled with anger and bloodlust. Her father wasn't home. He took the key from beneath the place she had shown me when she loved me, beneath the welcome mat, and we went inside. Slowly, discreetly, emotion began to seep into his voice, and his eyes danced with gleeful insanity. This was not the sorrow I had seen before, but a sickened poise and delight. He sat up straight, looking at me. I felt my heart speed up, felt cool fear wrap around me. His face slowly split to a wide grin. I killed her, the Dark One said, his smile as wide and wild as that of the Cheshire Cat in Lewis Carroll's classic story. I stabbed her. I watched the blood pour out of her breast in a crimson ribbon. and I laughed. He stopped, letting out a childish giggle, and I didn't just stab her, I mutilated her. I ripped that bitch to shreds. As she screamed, he exclaimed, his voice rife with glee. It was music to my ears. Dot Trimble, she was his girl, but now she, no one's girl's ES dead. Dr. Dead as old Jacob Marley, dead as a doornail, dead as King Tut and freaking KHA man. She's gone, Doc Trimble, and he's gone, too. He giggled again, enjoying his own private joke. I was frozen in place by the horrific demon before me. Here was the monster at last, brought to the forefront for the whole world to see. This, I thought, frantically, this is what lives inside us all. This, he's gone, she's gone. Hey, that rhymes. So what the hell? It's just as well. His grin widened, even more as he saw the look on my face. Could that be fear I see, Dr. Trimble? He inquired mockingly. I assure you, there's no need to be afraid. I'm only as sane as the rest of us. Granted, that's not saying much. This is one sick, screwed up world we live in, isn't it? That was when the laughter started. It was high, mad, raucous sound. It was the way one might expect Satan himself to laugh. That laugh stretched out into eternity, dragging me into madness, pulling me under, until finally I thought I would simply crack. Somehow, in an instant of boundless mercy, the cackles subsided into sobs, and the grin left the fiend's face until he was once again only a boy, lost, confused, and ready for his hell. He sobbed and whimpered. For a few minutes before speaking the last words I heard him speak before he left my office. She was my girl, Dr. Trimble, he said, and his voice was brimming with unbound sorrow. My girl, my girl. So he writes it. Writing in this journal by the light of a small lamp, finishing up what is either my third or fourth bottle of wine. I have not done justice to what I saw and felt today. It would, I believe, take a writer far beyond my mediocre skill to truly convey what I have felt. I am, after all, a psychologist, not an author, but even that means nothing now. I am quite convinced that the boy was right. The mind exists only to contain the soul, and that, I am sure beyond the shadow of doubt, can never be understood, and nor, I believe, after witnessing what I have, should it be. Credits to Bindi 555.